Mahendra from Mayapur, and he sent this in a few weeks ago, but there was not enough time. I don't think he's online right now, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it out, and then he can check it out later on. So he says, I live in Mayapur and I know devotees who require their children to chant a certain number of rounds of japa per day. And there's another group of children who take the initiative to chant because they are watching others chant, many of whom are still young children, and they chant fully mechanically only. Many parents do this with the best of intentions, as if to generate positive samskars from having contact with the practice of japa since childhood. But on the other hand, taking into account the offenses of distracted chanting and the unconscious habit of chanting the holy names in like distractedly, automatically as adults as they do as children. It's a little unclear, but do you see what he's saying? And that's not the whole question. So yeah, basically saying that that habit of chanting distractedly as a child then carries on to adulthood. And then he says, how to proceed in this sense with the devotional education of our children? Would it be better to restrict japa chanting while they are not yet mature enough to understand the deeper meaning of this practice?
Well, it's an interesting question. And there,
does Shamsundar have to translate the question first?
Okay, in Spanish. Okay, not too good take.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, nice to hear your voice, Shamsundar. My old friend. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't know if there are different ways to answer it, and different. I would say that my two gurus, Srila Prabhupada and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, answered it in different ways, in one sense. And to give an example, Prabhupada, very Nityananda-esque, if you will, would encourage everybody to chant and be happy, right? And emphasize things like even chanting in your sleep is good, you know, which are statements that are found in the scriptures. And so he would, for example, have us engage new devotees who weren't initiated in chanting japa until they could chant 16 rounds and be recommended for initiation. And Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, on the other hand, as I recall, would not allow devotees to chant japa until they got initiated and they got the mala. We would call it a guru mala, to get the mala from the guru, to discourage the idea of going to the store, buying a mala and chanting and circumventing, consciously or unconsciously, the guru with whose blessing we should chant, and without which, and if without which means ignoring necessity for the guru, constitutes an offense to the name. So that was his policy. Prabhupada seemed to be able to digest whatever downside there might be from the other perspective. So both of my gurus have kind of, by their example, answered that question in what appears to be opposite ways. Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj wouldn't chant everyone, would encourage, on the other hand, everyone to do kirtan and so forth. But the mala has come from the guru mala, not a market mala, if you will. So now, in the case of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, as I say, he's emphasized a certain point. Prabhupada emphasized the same point in that he would encourage everyone to chant, and you could chant on beads and so forth, but he wouldn't give initiation until they had been recommended in a certain point, and they had been chanting 16 rounds, and sometimes it was for like 6 months or or something like that. So it was clear, I would say, anyway, in Prabhupada's ISKCON, and in the time that I was there, that you needed a guru, and that you were trying to secure that grace connection. So the principle that Sridhar Maharaj was emphasizing was not de-emphasized or lost, but they had different approaches to it. That doesn't entirely, I don't think, answer the question, which relates to children chanting, but to some extent it does. And otherwise, I would say that the best thing, first of all, for children, as far as raising them in Krishna consciousness and having the hope or the desire that they would become nice devotees, the best thing that parents can do, and which is essential, is that they personally set an example. And I do think that there is something to be said for an example set by parents for their own participation in Krishna consciousness that stands out to devotees, to their children, an example that that can create an interest in the children by maintaining somewhat of a mystique about it. This is for adults. This kind of practice, rather than the opposite of that, getting them to do it right away and so on and so forth. Because children, if the parents have other habits like smoking or drinking or something like that, and you don't let the kids do it, the kids will want to do it. When they start to grow older, they want to. The forbidden fruit is always a little more tasty, if you will. So if the forbidden fruit is something like chanting japa on beads, it might have a very positive effect. So I'm just thinking of that as we speak. But I think that overall that if the parents set a good example, well, that's going to carry the day for the most part. And when the children will come around to identifying with that example, well, it's hard to say, but I think that they will ultimately respect my parents. They weren't hypocritical about it. They weren't telling me to do something that they themselves weren't doing. If there's no disconnect there between what they do and what they say, and tell the children, that just goes a really long way. So the main emphasis should be the example. And I think that, as I say, restraining them from some practices and so forth. After all, we do that with regard to aspects of deity worship and so on. It may have some merit. That said, I think it's also possible we go the other way. If that example is there on the part of the parents, and you stress to the children, what the chanting is, and the fact that you've gotten the mala from the guru and you're chanting now, hopefully you'll also be initiated when it has, at which time you'll have the blessing, so on and so forth. So I think it's just a question of how you educate them, and the less that it's a blind type of approach, if you will, this chanting works, get them to chant somehow or other without explaining anything. That's probably better. Plenty of children seem to really love Krishna, and their parents think they're great devotees in their childhood, playing with deities as dolls and so forth, only to hit adolescence and forget it altogether. So yeah, that's at least in the West, that's quite common. Now Mahendra, my disciple there, lives with 4 children and his good wife in Mayapur, and of course that's a very beautiful and conducive setting, and it's a very favorable environment. with Mahendra's help, I'm hoping to get a small parcel over there in Navadvip for myself to spend sometimes some months of the year ongoing as I grow a little older here. But it's hard to do too much wrong or damage in such a place by encouraging devotees to chant. So I think there's different ways to look at it, and parents need to make that decision themselves. I hope that helps.
Sajan has a follow-up question.
Okay.
Dandavats Maharaj.
Haribol. Haribol.
Thank you. Was it Srila Prabhupada? I mean, I'm not 100% clear on who was it originally who said there are no hard and fast rules for chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Was it Mahaprabhu? Was it Srila Prabhupada or someone else?
This is a statement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the second verse of Shikshastakam. He says,
Okay.
Nam Namakari Bahuda.
Okay.
There are many names, they all have power, and that one can do he actually says Smaranam of Nam, which would be japa, and there are no rules. Can be done
Okay.
at any time. At any time.
Okay. So
What he means by that, I should say what he means by that, there aren't rules for that type of Nam Smaranam of the holy name that would be applicable to doing other types of mantra smarnam, like the Gopal mantra, for example, which begins with a seed, a bij, has an appeal to it, is in a dative case, the names of the Lord within that mantra, and so forth. So he's saying that the japa or the smarnam of Nam, which would include the Mahamantra, which only consists of names, would not be subject to the same rules and regulations that other types of mantra smaranam would.
Okay. So there's a wonderful bhajan, I believe it may be from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura, perhaps, that says that the power of the name is it's evident, it's transformative power, liberating power, to bring salvation to one, is evident especially in the cases of persons like Valmiki and Ajamila. Do you recall a bhajan like that among our bhajans?
I don't recall a particular bhajan, but the statements speak for themselves. Ajamil engaged in Namabas by calling his son Narayan and calling for his son at the time of death, and the Vishnu Dutas intervened, and Valmiki Ramayana is said to have come out of chanting Mara, 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 Mara.
Right.
Valmiki was preoccupied with death. Mara means death, and you chant Mara, 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 it turns into Rama, Rama, Rama. So
right. So my point being that those are very, very encouraging and life-affirming, if you will, examples, whereas it seems as if later, even Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's presentation of the 10 offenses to the holy name would seem to be a little less encouraging, a little more like, no, here are the 10 hard and fast rules for chanting the holy name. And then, of course, there are supplementary books written by devotees about the technical details which are absolutely required for chanting, for getting the benefits from the holy name. And so these things, there seems to be a little bit of a mixed message, if you will, there in regard to...
Yeah, I could comment on that.
Please, thank you.
First of all, I think the extreme statements, as if you will, as to the efficacy of the name, even if it's chanted unconsciously or by thinking you're calling your son, rather than actually calling on God. In the case of Ajamila, these statements speak about an aspect of the name's efficacy, its capacity, that is, to give mukti, even if it's chanted in such ways. Now, mukti is far from the full benefit that one can get from the name, which is that benefit, prema. So these statements are made in one sense to say what to speak of. If you chant the name inattentively, you can get mukti. That is meant to inspire us to think, well, if I would chant attentively, what can I get from that? And if there are things that I can do that would be more conducive, that would help me to mine the gem of the holy name and its riches, its wealth, what can I do? So for example, if I find out something is an offense to the name, that's very valuable information, and I would like to incorporate that into my life. So the 10 offenses, with regard to that, Bhaktivinoda Thakura said, well, without sambandha gyan, just chanting, you're not going to get prema, or you're not going to make much advancement, because that was his experience in Bengal. All kinds of people were chanting, but they didn't have the proper understanding of the name, the theology that underlied it, at least in a general sense. So, for example, they thought, we chant Krishna Nam, we'll chant Kali Nam, there'll be no difference, which is an offense to the name. So without that kind of basic sambandha gyan, I'm not talking about super, theological insights into the details of the underlying philosophy and theology of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in a broad sense. Well, without sambandha gyan, you don't know that there's a difference, for example, between Krishna Nam and Ganesh Nam. And so you would make what amounts to an offense to the name by thinking, chant one or chant the other, and you might be chanting one or the other thing. Either one will give me mukti, which is what I want. So without good siksha as to these offenses, for example, one's subject to committing them and getting in the way. I don't think that contradicts what Mahaprabhu said. There are no hard and fast rules to chanting. One can chant anytime, any place, under any circumstances, and get a benefit. But if you want the full benefit, there are things that you could know and add to your life and your practice that would facilitate that ultimate benefit or wealth of the name, which is prema, coming out and one attaining it oneself. So, and otherwise, that you could chant any place, anytime, anywhere, under any circumstance. There are no rules for chanting. That's one thing, but I don't think it's a rule that you shouldn't offend the name. but it's obvious, right? That if one thing is chanting, one thing is chanting the name, the other thing is going against the name. So if we go against the name, then and offend him, that's another thing. So to become aware of those, and they're not that. It doesn't take a big brain to assimilate what the offenses are, and then try to avoid them. The name, after all, is non-different from Krishna. So if we can offend Krishna, then we could offend its name, although it might be a little harder to do so, given the generous nature of the name when compared to the named Krishna himself. Well, Krishna, it's not different, but it is different.
Right, I understand.
So,
I understand.
does that help?
Oh, yes, yes. Another kind of question came up just based on what you just so beautifully shared. I seem to recall Prabhupada, he actually chanted a small amount of King Kula Shekhar's prayers, and Guru Maharaj actually was very, very fond of Jamunacharya and put some verses from him into his Prapana Jivanamrita book. But in my study of the Alwars and the predecessors of Ramanujacharya, it seems that there was not some dichotomy or kind of polarity between mukti and prem, but there seems to be a very large dichotomy between mukti and prem in like more contemporary Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or I should say Gaudiya
Well,
Vaishnavism, because that was South
think
Indian Vaishnavism.
yeah, I don't think it's contemporary Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but I think it's Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Jiva Goswami
Right.
in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu in his commentary, makes the point that there are different types of mukti, and there's, for example, mukti in which the attaining the salokya, the mukti of living on the same planet with God, or having the same opulence as God, having a form like that of God. There's a type of mukti that one can attain in which that is actually the goal of the practitioner. So one sets as its goal, makes a sankalpa, commitment. This is what I want to attain. I want to live on the same planet. I want to attain salokya. I want to live in God's planet. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of benefits from doing that. Mm-hmm. So he wants those things. Mm-hmm. And then there are devotees in Vaikuntha who don't want those things. They only want praying for Narayan. Mm-hmm. And they accept those things because, well, that goes along with the praying. So these are two different types of mukti that are attained within Vaikuntha. One which is praying focused, the other which is focused on the perks, I would say, living in having a similar body, living on the same planet, and so forth. But then if he goes on to say, and then there are the devotees of Govinda, don't even want the prem of Vaikuntha. They want a prem, the kind of prem that's unheard of in Vaikuntha, where there's only dasya and sakhya-rasa, and Narayan is God. And the idea that you could wrestle with him, that's like, you got to be kidding me. That would be an offense. That would be an offense. You think I'd go wrestle with Narayan, and he has 4 arms anyway. Of course, if I have 4 arms too, maybe I could be an equal match. No, you can't think like that in Vaikuntha, right?
Right.
So therefore, it said the praying, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is coming through Sankirtan and giving to the people access to Golok. That's unheard of even in Vaikuntha, and that is the kind of praying that is qualitative, let's say, different or more intense than you find in Vaikuntha. So it's a Gaudiya point. I think it's a pretty good point. I don't think the Ramanuja Sampradaya or the Madhva Sampradaya have any real sense about an abode beyond, if you will, awe and reverence. Even Ayodhya is, you could become a das there. It's dasya bhakti, like Hanuman. Of course, Ram has parents, has some brothers, friends. It's a little different, but it's not that you can attain that necessarily. Attainment is all in dasya bhakti. But when you get to Goloka, it's another thing. So I believe they look at it more like we find in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, an idea that Narayan sometimes shows this, maybe on Janmastami, the Narayan, the Krishna Leela, and expands his own self as his own associates, but everybody else can be entertained by that, find it charming, but they can't participate in it. Therefore, Gopakumar wasn't satisfied when he saw that in Vaikuntha. He went to go on to Goloka. Now, among the Alwars, there are some who seem to have an ambition like that of the queens of Dwarka.
Princess Andal.
So I was thinking of researching that
Andal.
recently. Yeah. Which would be peculiar in that, as I'm saying here, it requires another loka. So you can't do that in Vaikuntha. There's one Lakshmi there only. So if you want to become a queen, now it might be that that in Andal wanted to take a birth in the Prakat Leela of Krishna, and from there attain Vaikuntha, and it's all Dasya Bhakti. I'd have to research that, and I'm not sure that would be easy to research. I have been thinking about it lately and how to research that. Best if I could talk with somebody in the Ramanuja Sampradaya who's an acharya there. I'm going to get this as an aside, an interesting topic. So, Golokar Premadan, Harinam Sankirtan, benediction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And, we seem suited for it, so it appeals to us. Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you so much.
Another question?
Yes, there are 2 questions from Krishna Kanaya from Berlin.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. Thank
you for your recent letter and update on your spiritual, social, marital, occupational, everything life. I much appreciated it, and I would encourage you in your present situation in terms of the interfaith dialogue that you're employed in. Yes, it's true, as you asked me in your letter, that at times I have not found interfaith dialogue to be that meaningful, but that doesn't mean there isn't a place for it, and depends. For me, it may not be that useful. For you and for others, it may be. And there's a lot of common ground between the different traditions and so forth. And I think it's good. Bhaktivinoda Thakura did some interfaith work, if you will, just through his writing and saying things like, and in Christianity we find sakhya-rasa, the brotherhood, but we don't find this madhurya, So he did this to try to put, as I sometimes say, Gaudiya Vaishnavism on the stage with the world religion. So you can do that in your community there. So I was going to write you an answer, but now I've answered. So I'm happy for you, and thank you for the update on your situation. So what are your questions this morning?
Thank you, Hare Krishna. So I have 2 brief questions, but something that you mentioned now. Thank you for receiving my letter. And you just said that Bhaktivinoda Thakura said something that in Christianity you have sakhya-rasa?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a very, he's speaking about it very broadly. One of the things emphasized, I think, in Christianity is brotherly love. And he might have had some reference from the Bible, something like that. Whereas that there's no emphasis on romantic love having a divine characteristic. It reminds me when he speaks very broadly, he says, well, in Christianity we find sakhya. I mean, he's not talking about it in a refined way that Rupa Goswami is, that there has to be an object of love that has the qualities that enable him to be an object of brotherly love or friendly love that you can interact with intimately. They're not showing that in Christianity, but there is an emphasis on brotherly love. And this reminds me of something I've written in my book, some of which I drew from C.S. Lewis, who was an Anglican theologian, very good one from times gone by. And he speaks about the virtues of brotherly love or friendly love, and points out how, in a worldly sense, friendly love has an air or an aura of spirituality to it in comparison to the other forms of love. And I've written about this, but in brief, the implication is that, well, for example, while romantic love and parental love have a biological basis to them, biologically, we're inclined, if you're driven towards a romantic relationship and or a parental relationship. But friendly love is independent of that biological necessity, if you will, and its independence is kind of gives it an aura of spirituality, but it's voluntary. It's not driven by nature alone as a must. So it has it's a different character. And while three is a crowd in romantic love, in friendly love, you can have as many friends as you want. The more, the merrier, which would seem to be the nature of heaven, if you will. The more, the merrier. So he speaks along these lines, and of the fact, for example, that comparison to other forms of love in brotherly love or friendly love, there's kind of a brutal honesty. You can't be brutally honest sometimes with your romantic partner or with your children, or even the teacher with the student. But in friendly love, it's like, hey, brother, this is where it's at, and I'm telling you because I'm your friend, So all of these things together make a nice case for that amongst the types of love that we find in the world, this friendly love has an aura of spirituality to it. Another example that for example, that comes to mind for myself is that if romantic love is to endure in a marital, for example, relationship, which it would lead to a committed relationship, it has to turn into friendship for it to endure, because the infatuation that it's based on initially will fade. And if it doesn't turn into friendly love, then one will just go chase after the illusion of infatuation somewhere else. And similarly in parental love has to mature into friendly love for it to be viable in the long term. Because at a certain point, when I'm 70 and my children are 50, well, they're adults. And so the parents and students will start to interact as friends then, if they're to continue to have a relationship, rather than me insisting, you're my son, you do what I want, you can't do this, you can't do that, which is the parental expressions of love. So there's many ways that I brought out, studying Mr. Lewis and my own insights, to make a case for the spiritual love, the spiritual love in transcendence is best represented in this world in worldly friendly love, because of these reasons. Now, I would make my case in my book, and to go on from there, the question is, but is there any actual friendly love with God? And if there is, where would we look? And the answer is, well, we should look to India, where there are many faces of God and correspondingly many approaches to love. And then I explain, giving some examples from the Upanishads, Gita, and so forth, of ideas or instances in which, from a general point of view to a very specific point of view, this friendly love exists. The specific point coming to ultimately the Bhagavatam and Krishna's playmates in Braj, which is, of course, then, as I reveal, what the book is about. So I'm going on a bit about it, but Bhaktivinoda, I think, was speaking along those lines about, well, the Christians have identified, something valued to Sakya, but so we have that there. Bhaktivinoda Thakura was, I would say, while pursuing his own spirituality, compelled by the core ideas of Christianity, more than he was any other of the world's religions. But then coming in touch with Vaishnavism through Chaitanya Charitamrita, then he thought this core idea is developed fully in of course he was speaking about Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I think he would say the same thing. It more developed in Vaishnavism and further developed in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In Vaishnavism, we put a face on God. A lot of times in Christianity, it says he doesn't have a face. I don't mean to make that in a cartoonish, sense, but that no one's seen the face of God, that he's beyond vision, is the way we would speak about it, beyond the ken of the senses. Ata Sri Krishna namari nabavid grayamindri sevan mukhe jivado swayamevas pratirha. So what is the senses perception? They're driven by the enjoying spirit within us to enjoy the objects of the senses. But if we develop through nam, serving disposition, then the senses are transformed and have the capacity to see God. So anyways, so on and so forth. So back to your question.
Yeah, but it's so interesting that you mentioned this. Thank you so much. Sorry, going back to what you just said. But in there are some Muslims and Christians who also say that God is like their best friend. So I could see that there's like sakhya-rasa also in these traditions. And when some people say that, oh, Holy Father, could this be the parental rasa like in reverse? I mean, comparisons are always like apples and pears, right? So is it okay to say that?
Well, when you say, oh, Holy Father, this is the opposite, as you said, it's in reverse. But if we look at Rupa Goswami's rasa doctrine, he has a place for the reverse, but it's not vatsalya, it's dasya, a form of dasya. For example, Krishna has sons in Dwarka with the queens. These sons have a relationship with Krishna as their father. So this is a type of dasya-rasa that the child has with the parent, whereas the vatsalya comes from the parent to the child because the parent is loving the child as a child. So I don't think the Holy Father idea, that's more of a form of dasya than it is a form of vatsalya. So I don't think, if you want to look for vatsalya somewhere in Christianity, you'd have to go to the cradle. Alone in a manger, how's it go? No crib for a bed. The baby Lord Jesus is lying his head or whatever on Mary's lap. So I was a Catholic boy, so and that's the Christmas carol, away in a manger, no crib for a bed. So this is, at least in Mary and Joseph, we find a prakash, a window in the prakat lila of Jesus, right? Wherein there's an expression of vatsalya for him. So through the Jesus avatar, it's possible to enter that prakash, we could say, and love him in that way. There are of course some saints who, in Christianity, Teresa of Avila, I think comes to mind, who have this idea of romantic, being the wife of Jesus, married to Jesus, right? Which has obviously romantic overtones. There was a time in Poland, I heard, in which the Polish Catholic, I believe, tradition brought a legal case against the ISKCON and the Hare Krishnas for them being some type of illicit, sect, deviant sect, and so forth. And one of my godbrothers went to court and argued the case. And one of the points they made was that this Krishna has 16,000 wives, they call him God, we can't have this in our country, And so he said, well, I think he put a nun on the stand and said, what's that ring on your finger? And of course, it was that in that particular sect, the nuns wore the ring on the finger as they had to become the brides of Jesus. And how many nuns are there in all over the world? More than 16,000. So he won the case. The case was dismissed in that way. But aware of this, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was in touch with Christian missionaries from Europe at the time the British occupied India, he made the point that this romanticism, if you will, spiritual romanticism, is a relationship with Jesus, who's the Son, who in our religion is the guru figure. That doesn't equate to the same thing that we're speaking about in terms of a relationship with God. And I think you could come back on that and say, well, he's the avatar of God in this form, with whom you could have that kind of relationship and let it be. You can go to Jesus Loka and be the bride of Jesus. And therefore, you have Madhurya-rasa, vatsalya-rasa, sakhya-rasa, and dasya-rasa in Christianity. But these ideas, these concepts are fully developed within Vaishnavism and Gaudiya Vaishnavism in particular. That's the way I would look at that. It's very nice to talk about it along those lines. Maybe I can meet your interfaith group at some time. You can make some points for me through, right? These kind of points.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
So we see that in our perspective, God has any number of faces. Asankhya, it said about his avatars. That means uncountable. So they're not just the ones that are listed in the Bhagavatam. And Krishna says in the Gita that Yada Yahi Dharmasya Glanam Bhavati Bhata Vitanam Dharmasya Sadatmanam Srijamiham Prutana Saranam Vinashaya Traduskam Dharma Samstapanartaya Sambhavami Yuge. I come age after age, millennium after millennium, to establish Dharma. And Bhaktivinoda Thakura, in one of his commentaries on the Gita, which I think he has two, says, and this does not pertain only to India. Also in other places, he will appear relative to the cultural circumstances and teach. And if you see his commentary, you can see there he's obviously referring to Muhammad and Jesus as Shakti-Vesha avatars of the Godhead. So this is the generous and broad side, if you will, of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that's very much brought out in Bhaktivinoda Paribar, and not at the cost of the deep internal side and prospect that we find within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So there we have authentic spirituality, right, appearing in other cultures through avatars that are, relative to those cultures. And there's, given that theological perspective of ours, there's no argument against the idea that there's a face of God in Vaikuntha that corresponds with the Jesus, and there Mary's there loving him. Now we don't have too many. What we lack in Christianity is there a sadhana by which I can enter into that moment and be a follower of Mary? Mary, right, the mother of Jesus. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. We have to bow our head when we say, blessed. How's that prayer go? I used to like that one. It was to Mary. Mary, mother of Jesus. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Anyway, it was a beautiful prayer to Mary. There's one, we could build a sadhana, help them build a sadhana for this. If you want to enter into the cradle Leela of Jesus in Vaikuntha, this prayer is the main prayer, for that. And then if you want Dasya, that's obvious. There's so many. If you want to have vatsalya, we could help them to develop the idea so that they could enter into Jesus Loka within Vaikuntha. It's possible. Why not? I think Thomas Merton, the Catholic theologian and monk, was looking for something like that when he went east. And interestingly, he was educated by a Gaudiya Vaishnava named Mahanam Brahmacharya, who wrote his thesis on Gaudiya Vaishnavism in comparison to Shankar and Ramanuja. I've mentioned it before. It's a very insightful text that's been published. It's entitled Vaishnava Vedanta. And Merton was a student of his, of sorts. And of course, Thomas Merton also lived into the time of Prabhupada and endorsed Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. But it's unfortunate that he didn't have a little more association. I would love to have talked to him as we're talking now about such. And imagine if we could get that incorporated into Catholicism, if you will. That would be fantastic. Jesus ki jai. So, do you have any further questions?
Jai. Yes, I do have two, but maybe we just talk about one question. It's kind of like more urgent. So I do have a friend. So it's like a question about which practice would you recommend for somebody who's into non-dualism. So I have a friend, he's into like Vipassana and like the whole Buddhist thing. And he was actually asking me for like more practices, like what more can he do? So I was like telling him about like Krishna and personal philosophy, and that, you know, I couldn't recommend him like a non-dual practice because like this is, you know, it's not my goal of life, you know. So but still I was wondering, what can I like recommend him? Like, can I just say, well, maybe chant Om, and what other ways are there besides maybe like sound meditation to kind of, you know, let him cross the bridge from the impersonal to the personal? Yeah, because he is not that interested in like a personal manifestation of divinity yet. So yeah, I was wondering. Thank you.
First of all, we're also non-dualists in that the Bhagavatam describes our ideology as Advaigyan Tattva, which means non-dual consciousness. But what we say is that that non-dual ultimate reality is at the same time variegated in the way it expresses itself. So there's one non-dual reality, but expresses itself in a variety of ways. And while we are one with it, we are also an aspect of it, in that sense, different from it. Like a blue lotus, to use a Ramanuja perspective, well, the blue and the lotus are inseparable, but they're different at the same time. Or if you take heat and light, they're aspects of fire that you can't separate from the fire, but they're not fire. They are fire and they're not fire, right? If you have heat, if you have fire, you have heat and light. But that's the heat and light are the energy of fire, and the fire is the energetic. So there's ways to talk to a non-dualist about a non-dual idea that at the same time includes some variety to it. So from just a philosophical point, that's interesting. And then I would say that, you know, well, I would say there are many schools of non-dualism that feel that there's a necessity for some form of bhakti in order to attain the non-dual reality. Therefore, they do bhakti. For example, chanting, they chant Krishna's name in order to attain non-duality, because it's said in the scriptures that bhakti is extremely efficacious and easy. It conforms with our natural material tendencies to interact with things and so forth. So bhakti as a means to a non-dual impersonal reality is very efficacious in comparison to trying to go that course without worship. because we're emotional by nature. We tend to regard others, whether they be sports figures or heroes of the superheroes, Batmans, or movie stars. Or this is just a natural tendency amongst us. There are people amongst us who have extraordinary qualities and things in nature that are very extraordinary, that stand out, like here in the redwoods. So Krishna says in the Gita, in California, among trees, I am the redwoods, right? Among bodies of water, I am the ocean. You stand on the shore of the ocean, it's just like vast and so forth. So this is very natural to humans. And so bhakti is very conducive as a practice for humans, because it takes in this human tendency. And even if you think, well, in the end, I am the redwood, I am the ocean, I am the ultimate reality, that these are just expression of or remind me of. Even if you think that, to try to think your way into that, if you will, is difficult. But to do bhakti, to attain that, is not what we do, but it's obviously easier. And this is mentioned in the Gita. So to chant Krishna Nam, for example, Hare Krishna, you could chant Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna mantra, and just focus on the mantra, even with an ideal to attain Sayuja Mukti, a non-dual, reality, and you would be taking into consideration your human nature and working with it rather than, against it. Like, if you want to say, okay, this is good, that is bad, but that's both good and bad are just illusion, hot or cold illusion. So I should expose myself to extreme hot and realize it's only an illusion. Expose myself to extreme cold and realize that it's only an illusion. That's difficult to do. But if I can do things that are favorable for Krishna and avoid things that are unfavorable for Krishna, that's a duality. I have a new, frame of reference of what's favorable and what's not. It's easier to conform to, by which I can transcend the duality. So, for example, if you live in Northern Europe and it's cold in the morning, you get up to serve the deity anyway, and because it's favorable. So your criterion of what's good or bad, hot or cold, is not arising out of your mind, which is producing the dualities. This is getting a little complicated, but it's arising out of another criterion. It's favorable for Krishna, it's unfavorable for Krishna. So I do it, and therefore I transcend the dualities of the mind. What I'm saying to you is that bhakti as a practice is a lot more friendly to the human condition, and it's wise to adopt it on that basis, even if through it your objective is to attain an impersonal form of realization. And furthermore, at least from the Hindu canon and all its sacred texts, it's very clear that without some measure of bhakti, one can't attain that anyway, because there is a God. Without grace on that side, even if you say, well, ultimate reality, I'm one with the ultimate reality, but I don't realize that now. Therefore, let me petition the ultimate reality to do what I cannot do. Show me the grace by which I can overcome the illusion that I myself, I don't have the means to do. Something like that. So this is some sense of bhakti. If I think ultimate reality is real, it must be more than what I am as a person. It must have more than at least what I have, and beyond the limitations of my material personality. So let me petition ultimate. Let me pray to ultimate reality that I can overcome the illusion that I'm different from him. That would be a way to frame it, perhaps. Anyway, good luck with that one.
Yeah, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Okay, Hare Krishna. So I have just a couple minutes. It took a long time with that, but I think it was interesting. So anything else briefly?
That was it.
Pressing.
That was it for
Was
the
it for the
questions.
questions?
Sorry, what was that?
Okay.
But if anybody has questions in the virtual Sangha, please voice your question.
Guru Maharaj, pranams, it's Omkar. I kind of wanted to carry on with what Krishna Kanaya was saying there. You know, there's this verse in Bhagavatam that kind of gets me hung up a little bit. It's about somebody practicing bhakti having gone through jnana and karma margs already. So taking that bhakti is spontaneous. How are we to see that? How can anybody be influenced by bhakti if they haven't gone through those two stages already?
Which two stages again?
Karma and jnana, having all that knowledge.
How can anybody be influenced by bhakti if they haven't gone through karma and jnana?
Yeah. Like, so would we to preach somebody, we'd know that they have impersonal background, like they're interested in Buddhism. I guess we could never know whether they've gone through. Is that what's behind it? We can never know what somebody has gone through in their lifetimes.
Well, I'm not clear on your question, but I'll start to give an answer and see if it addresses your question. First of all, bhakti is transcendent, right? So it's a post-liberated status ultimately, right? So it's very high, but it's also very generous. So bhakti comes to us through sadhu sangha, right? And sadhu sangha the nature of sadhu sangha is it doesn't discriminate who to give bhakti to or who not to give bhakti to. In fact, a great devotee who's moving in this world only under the influence of Krishna's internal potency, a Mahatma, wherever he or she walks or goes, is a blessing. One time, one of my godbrothers made a point that he was at a place where Prabhupada was going to speak or reside or something at a hotel for a short period of time. So he pulled up in a car and the doorman opened the door and Prabhupada, of course, came out. And so his realization was, this godbrother of mine, that doorman is opening doors all year long. How many millions of doors he opened? He just opened the right door, because by opening that door and consciously or unconsciously serving Prabhupada, because of who Prabhupada was, then he was touched by bhakti. So he didn't have he wasn't a jnani. He probably wasn't even on the karma marg, if you will. He might not have even been a religious person, but he could be touched by bhakti. So bhakti, being generous, has the capacity to touch people and influence people who have not tread the path of karma and jnana. Now, if they tread the path of bhakti, they take it up. We say that one can take up bhakti if they have faith in bhakti alone, because the power of bhakti, it doesn't require that you have other things in place in order to practice. You don't have to be a celibate, for example, to practice bhakti, but to practice jnana or Ashtanga yoga, you have to. So there's a prerequisite that one has to follow in order to become qualified for jnana or for yoga. So in the Gita, for example, Krishna speaks about nishkam karma. You do karma, which in that system is following the varnashram dharma according to your caste, without attachment to the fruits, which purifies the heart, which enables you in due course to be able to sit and lead a contemplative life, which yoga, Ashtanga yoga, and jnana are ultimately examples of. So bhakti, by contrast, you can take up the chanting of bhakti by seeing the devotees becoming attracted to them and chanting. There's no prerequisite that you have to meet. other than just faith in the name. And of course, now when you take that up, you will grow and you'll make progress. And the way in which that progress will start to show up is that the kind of progress that you would have made in karma marg, you will find that you're making. The kind of progress you would have made in yoga or gyan marg, you'll find that is coming. And in due course, you'll find that prem is coming as well. Does that help?
Yeah, but I'm still
My-
having a hard time harmonizing. Like, how do you know the verse I mean from Bhagavatam? I think it's on the
What
third
verse?
canto, but I really forgot which one. Where it says that a person who is now doing bhakti is to be seen having gone through those two stages prior to having taken up bhakti, having gone through jnana and karma.
Okay, that's a little bit different. I think what is meant there is that the goal, properly understood, the goal of karma marg, the goal of gyan marg, the goal of all the scriptures is ultimately what it culminates in is love for Krishna. This is what the scriptures are pointing to: love of God, right? He has different forms: Krishna, Narayan, Nrsimha, and so forth. Love of God. This is what they're pointing to. So, and in Gaudiya perspective, and it's well reasoned and supported by the scripture, that form of Krishna is Swami Bhagavan. So that would be the fullest measure of what the scriptures are pointing to. So if someone is chanting Hare Krishna and wants to love Krishna, then they've realized something that one in the karma marg or gyan marg may not have even realized yet as to the goal. They've understood the goal, and independently of the karma marg or the gyan marg, and in that sense, they passed through karma and gyan, because going through karma is meant, and gyan is meant to result in that. They've already got that result. Now they've got that result in an immature way, not in the mature sense of the term, but immaturely. It hasn't fully fructified. But here you can find somebody in the karma and the gyan marg who don't necessarily even see it as the goal. If that's the goal of these two, ultimately, and I decide I'm just going to chant Hare Krishna, then what need do I have for karma and gyan? In one sense, I've already surpassed them. That's the idea that's being presented there. But as I said, as you actually chant Hare Krishna from that position, then the results that you would get from the karma marg or the gyan marg will start to show up in you, to the extent that they're not in you already. So it's not that they've practiced systematically the whole karma marg and the whole gyan marg already in previous lives, and therefore they're chanting Hare Krishna, although they're an atheist and they just started, they got converted today or something or whatever. They still have bad habits, so then it doesn't make sense, right? And I think that's what you're dealing with. But if you look at it in the way that I'm speaking about it, I think that's what the text is saying. They haven't gone systematically through it, but here, this is the goal. They've already understood that, so they're pursuing it directly. So they don't have need for karma and gyan. But then again, the results that would have come from systematically practicing those paths will come in them before the prem comes in. So they're there, but not in the mature sense. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes so much more sense. Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Haribol.
Okay, glad I could help. Haribol. Yeah, so nice to be with all of you. And I hope to be here next week as well. And just looking at everybody here. See so many friends. There's Gopal Mandini and family. Sevanidhi, I see. Shraddha Devi, the Gopal family. Hari John, Ananta Govinda, just south of us. There's Drista out there in cold but beautiful Colorado. My sister lives out there near you. Kanu Ram, Krishangi, all the way from Finland. Okay. Sadvi and group in Bulgaria. Here's Murli Dar. I'll be seeing him later today. Coming over. And Saki and Indonesia, from Bhaktivan in Kansas. Here's William Maniard. Now, I don't think I've met William. I'd like to. Anandamayi and Ujjwal must be with you both. There's Yabat. Yeah, hello, Hare Krishna. You wrote me some questions. I'm glad I could answer. For your questions, thank you very much. And let's see who else is here. Some other people. This is iPhone Namarasana from Poland, Yakshamash. Bamsid Hari, okay, this south of us in San Francisco, Mahamantra. In North Carolina, Ganga Shakti. I think she's in Germany, and Ram Mohan is in close by there, I hope. There's Vijay Kumar, also a Californian at this time. Yeah, so don't mind me looking through here, everybody. Sajjan, of course. Omkar. Are you in Finland, Omkar? Yes. Okay, Finland. All right, I'll be with you next week. Go Premanandi. Haribo.
Haribo.